How's it going, YouTube? Commencing today with another video, and today, guys, the Labrynth is going to be where to hand trap, and I'm very excited to do this video because we're going into AGOT format. Things are getting a little bit more settled, so today we're going to be talking a lot more in depth about the different matchups that you really need to know where to interact with, because it's going to be really important, especially with Rescue Ace. There's multiple variants of it, so that's something where you really want to make sure that you understand which variant you're playing against and then hand trap accordingly. We're also doing a giveaway today. Huge shout out to my friend Rodney. I went to go buy this from him, then he ended up just donating it to the channel because he wanted to see somebody who couldn't afford a deck get a deck in their hands, and that's really cool. So if you want to enter the giveaway for a Runic Chimera deck, definitely go ahead down in the comments below and then comment W Rodney just for the donation to the channel. I really do appreciate you, friend. That goes for everyone too that really wants to be able to give back. That's the number one thing that I like to do here, is give away as much as possible, because one day I hope to be able to give something away to everyone, and we're doing that one day at a time. So now we have an entire Runic Chimera deck to give away, and I do hope that you're excited for that. So definitely, again, go down in the comments below, comment W Rodney if you want to enter your chance to get a Runic Chimera deck. Huge shout out to my sponsors over on Gem, Grimoire, Imperium, Dragonshield, and Cloud. I appreciate all of you for being here, and thank you for all of you for watching the channel, because without all of you, then I wouldn't have a channel. We are less than 700 subs away from getting to 20,000. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it, because we're almost there. Now let's hop right on into where to hand trap. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be Dark World. Now this deck is definitely pretty degenerate. If you have no hand trap, you're probably taking an L to this deck unless it bricks. But at the same time, I have Nibiru and Droll as both very good cards versus this deck. Another one that's really underrated is Lancia. Lancia says that your opponent cannot banish the Genta. They can't use Gate. Like, there's a lot of things they just can't do, which is very, very good. So Lancia against this deck is also very good, doubling up against Flu too. So a pretty solid sideboard card at the moment. The Bishul or the Crow are very good against Purrely. Purrely is the one that gets someone to your board, activates your opponent, rips one from their hand, and then they discard the Silva, making you put 2 cards from your hand to the bottom of the deck. And then eventually you will get hand looped by the time that they go Akashik, and then Akashik back the Purrely. If you do have like a Veiler at that time, they didn't really do anything else, you could at least Veiler the Akashik, which is fine. But at the same time, you just want to go after the Purrely in the graveyard. Make sure this does not get summoned. You can also Bell this effect, which is very good too. Bell just isn't very common in the format right now. I put it in like the Labrynth slide and I think one other, but at the same time, the Bishuls or Crow are definitely good against Purrely. Ashing the Genta is really solid here, because you want to keep your opponent away from Gate as much as possible. That's why Lancia is very strong. When this card gets banished and then your opponent controls your Dark World card, it does get summoned. It allows them to summon Dugaris. If they don't have Jen or Ken, then you can definitely go ahead and Veiler, Imperm, or even Ash the Dugaris. But you're always just going to Ash the Genta and then go after the Jen, which they're most likely going to summon Ken on you, because it's just the better combo to do. Your opponent could also be on like Gianna to Transverser, but it's like less common. So Veiler Imperm on Gen is definitely very popular here. I think that's going to be your number one stop. But if your opponent does reach an awkward point in their combo, they will summon Dugaris to draw and pitch. So if you haven't seen Jen or Ken yet, maybe you go ahead and just stop the Dugaris to stop your opponent from being able to get into more cards. Going into Mikanko here, Droll, another very solid card. This deck searches quite a lot, so you want to make sure that you're able to keep your opponent away from more searches. Bell or Crow onto the Spell Hero on the left, the Mikanko Dance. This card's really strong, allowing your opponent to just go ahead and Reborn and attach this, which says that nothing can be targeted, which is really annoying. Also, I believe not being able to be destroyed by card effects. Overall, a very solid card that you really don't want to see on the board. Unless you have like Scareclaw Cash in hand or something, right? So definitely want to make sure that you Bell or Crow this effect. Ash on the Mikanko Water card here. This card is very strong too, being able to get you to your Hare. You want to make sure that that's going to get Ash immediately, so your opponent can't go further. And then again on the Hare, you want to go ahead and Imperm or Veiler. Keep your opponent away from more of the spells. Going on to Rescue Ace, there's going to be a lot to talk about here, because there's 3 different variants we have to talk about. Starting off with the Escuchados build, typically your opponent's going to summon Reproducus and then summon Escuchados underneath, and then Reproducus call anything, which is pretty crazy. This one's for types. Protoss was for attribute. So they just call whatever typing you're playing, and then you just can't summon a monster. So you really want to make sure that you're holding your Mourner, your Veiler, your Imperm before the Escuchados to make sure that you don't auto-lose to this card. You kind of have to know if your opponent's doing this, though. They'll summon a Zolde and summon Nemesis Flag, which allows you to go ahead and search the Escuchados. So definitely a very scary card, but not very common right now, but you will see it. So if you do start seeing this, you want to hold your negation for that. Turbulence obviously is going to be a hand trap magnet. Mourner, Veiler, Imperm, going to be the most common one amongst all three of the variants. Probably even more variants now. The deck just has so many ways to be played, but you definitely want to go ahead and hit the Turbulence, not on effect on summon, unless you've already seen the emergency played. If you haven't seen emergency played yet, then you can just chain it to the effect. But if it hasn't been played yet, I would not try and mess around with this. Also, if there's an SP on board, then you can't do that anyway. You just want to make sure that you hit it on summon and not on effect. Ashing emergency, of course, you just don't want your opponent to get the Turbulence. If they have 2 engraved, you can always crow one of the rescue cards out, which is like fine, but if they have more or like extend into it, then you kind of just like lose a card. Lancey against this is unironically like not even that bad, because you force your opponent to have to emergency for like a Turbulence, otherwise they can't summon one, which is also pretty funny. They also don't get like the preventer line, so a couple things to think about there. Wanted, you can actually bell, which I think is fine because you keep your opponent away from Hydrant. So it's kind of the same thing as it was before, where if your opponent just doesn't see Hydrant or Airlifter, it can be very awkward for them. So if you do have a random bell and your opponent activates Wanted, maybe you go ahead and just bell the Wanted, which is fine because it adds from deck or grave. So this is something where you can go ahead and just stop the card immediately, cut off the whole engine. You also deny a draw because you don't let your opponent get to the other Diabell star cards, so they have nothing to put back for the draw. So bell on this actually is not that bad. Then you have the Terahertz line, which loses to Nib. They can put up the Terahertz all they want, but once it gets nibbed, it's not really that big of a concern because they don't have the Disave Worm live. They don't have the Meteorologic live. That's the Xseed that sends. It's a Resolution Imperm. So Nibiru against that variant is very good. Overall, I think that Nibiru is just a 3 of in the main deck. This format, it's very strong. I like it a lot, just something to think about. But Rescue is definitely one of those decks that you have to look out for right now. Again, 3 different variants, probably more. But these are really impactful spots to go ahead and hand trap if you are worried about those matchups. Tearlament also has like 50 variants right now. This is probably like the most varied deck at the moment because there's so many things you can do with it. Using Droll against this deck is really strong because if your opponent's going to be milling a ton, you don't want them being able to add 100 times. Which does happen. The ads, the draws off Beast, Garura, the search off Solic, Scream. You just deny your opponent so much value. Even the Trivia Karma, Banish, if it's like a late send under Droll already, they don't get to like Purrely. So a lot of things that you really want to take in consideration, but if you have nothing else, Droll is definitely okay. Nibiru is pretty fine against this deck because no one's really playing King of the Swamp anymore. It's not really popular at all. At that time, too, if your opponent is going to summon like a Bahamut, you can at least Nibiru and stop the hard negation from coming down. Especially after your opponent summons a Destrudo, then you want to nib immediately if they have a 7 on board, because that means Baron. So both of those cards very strong against Tearlament right now. Bell, Bishul, Crow against any of the names going off in grave. Again, usually crimes in the sideboard, so denying a fusion name for the entire game is very solid. Ashing Shiren is always just correct. If they open up Shiren, that's fine. If they just open Planet and activate Planet, I might actually just Ash Planet. Like, if it's the Shiren or the Planet first, I'm probably just Ashing whichever one I see. I think Ashing the Shiren, like waiting for Shiren, is still correct, though. Because you don't want your opponent to be able to just, like, use it anyway. So I would still say, like, Ash the Shiren. And then if your opponent opens, like, Foolish Burial, dump Kelbeck, obviously just Ash the Kelbeck because you don't want your opponent milling 5. Or, like, Agito, either or. But it's still really correct. If you want to just use it on Planet, it's like fine. Probably wait for Shiren, and then again, Kelbeck or Agito is fine. There's not a great place ever to like Veiler or Imperm in this deck, like ever right now, unless they're on like the Horse card and there's some Zombie Vampire, which again, the Horse cards still aren't that popular. Mourner, Veiler, Imperm on Bahamut Shark is still really solid. Again, turning off a hard negation and a add back, because the Toad can just add back to your cache, so it's already broken. And then you can also just like negate the tier cache because it's a mill 3 on summon. It's the same thing if you see them like normal summon them early. You can like Veiler Imperm that too. I'm probably just going after like the sends that I know are going to be mills. You can hit the Rhino, but it's just like they're only getting a mill 2 out of that, which is like still fine because they can still mill crazy. It happens, but like there's nothing else really at that point, so you can always just go ahead and like Veiler the Rhino, but I'm probably just going to wait for Bahamut at that point. You got to take a gamble if they're on the Bahamut or not, but I think I would rather just wait for that because I'm not really too concerned about what's going to get milled over like a hard negate, right? So just something to think about. If they are on Rukalos for whatever reason, you can just hold Imperm for that, but Again, not very common. Mannadium, this is another deck that we've been seeing quite a bit of. I'm really shocked that Vasas Starfrost is $1. Like, that's insane. I just saw that in TCG today. I was like, wow, this card just fell. But if your opponent does have a Vasas Starfrost in the graveyard, you want to Bishul or Crow this preemptively so your opponent cannot summon the Astrolabe. If your opponent has like 2 Vasas and like one 1500, 2100 monster, then you can just hit the warrior out of the graveyard. But at the same time, usually it's like the Vasas will have like 1 of, which is still fine. You can also like Crow or Bishul, usually the arrival target, or you can just Bell arrival. Just keep your opponent off cards basically as much as possible. I always try to keep my opponent away from Astrolabe as much as possible, because again, it's a free 8 on the board that can also pop like the Meek. So something just to keep in consideration. Droll absolutely cooks this deck. If they go Clarium and then you Droll them, they just pass. There's nothing they can do. Nibiru is pretty mid, but it's still also fine, because usually if they don't go immediately into like Baron or what have you, you also just don't have a card banished to that point, so the worst they can do is like pop your card with Dissipator. So if they like open Dissipator, then you can like nib on the summon of the 2 other monsters with Cross Sheep and Astrolabe. It's pretty good. Nibiru is just a card that you really have to be on right now. It's really strong. Ash Clarium all the time. You can Ash Therium Heart. I'm always Ashing Clarium though, because especially if you open up like Valor Imperm, I'm not trying to be like, okay, cool, you can add the Therium Heart and like normal summon something and then like Valor and then they chain Riem. That's just not something I want to go after. So I'm just Ashing Clarium every time. You can Ash the Riem, but I'm just going to Valor Imperm the Riem, because if Asas is not a quick effect, the Riem is. So definitely something to think about as far as the pop from hand goes. All right, so Chimera, this is an interesting one because there's just so many different things that I can do now. A lot of these lists are main decking a lot of the crazy cards like the Barrier Statue and the End of Anubis. Definitely Droll this deck. This deck is really rough to play under Droll. Belling the Chimera Fusion add back and Grave is also very important. It's very solid because it just keeps your opponent away from more fusions, which they desperately need with the new guy now. Bestial or Crow onto the Invader of Darkness, the Barrier Statue, or the End of Anubis, all very good targets to get rid of. You still have to worry about like the Dark really being engraved, because then if they're banished, then of course they're going to just summon them back. But if you can keep your opponent away from the fusions, then you're still in a very good position. You have to be very smart about when you banish, but it's still correct to banish when they're targeted to be summoned. If they have to like burn through more just to be able to summon this off of like banishing a beast, you like banish it and they go like Dark Ruler effect the banish, bring it back. They're just wasting a lot of cards, so it's still going to put you in a better position overall. I do think that Nibiru and Droplet should be in your deck somewhere right now. So definitely keep that in consideration whenever you're looking at your deck building, especially when we look at different things like this, where it's just like a hard negate that just like causes you to lose most times. Obviously under Invader Darkness, you can't use Droplet, but at the same time, under the other ones, Droplet's still very strong. Ash and Sword Knight is still very correct, and then Valor Imperm on the Baphomet is still going to be the right call. Again, if they have the other fusion, they have the other fusion, but it's still the best spot that we're going to go ahead and Valor Imperm. You can, if they don't have Kotal in the grave, like Valor the Beast on board, which is very cool. Sometimes they just open Sword Knight and not Kotal, and then they can't add back the fusion because you imperm the Beast, and that also trades with the card that was going to get ripped anyways, so you know gets ripped and not like what could potentially get ripped. And then they also potentially don't have fusion, which is very cool because the beast on board is not considered the flying mythical beast anymore once it's negated, so they can't add back fusion. So next up here we have Unchained. This is a matchup that we've been seeing quite often over the last couple months. Imperm on Soul of Rage or Caesar. It's something that you want to hold the Imperm for your turn to turn either of these off. Obviously the Soul of Rage is going now into SP, which is very scary compared to what it was going into before, which is just Berserk, which essentially does nothing. But now we have to worry about which one we want to negate. This is another reason why I was talking about Droplet being very strong too. I think Droplet's a very good card right now. Yama in the grave, or even Shyama, we definitely want to make sure these get banished. So if you have Crow, you can go ahead and banish the Shyama preemptively before it targets something, because it'll still destroy even if you banish it. Then also getting rid of the Yama, which is very strong too. A lot of times your opponent will only end on like the High Wave King Caesar unless their hand's like cracked. The Bishul is also very strong onto Yama, whereas Crow is more diverse. So something just to consider. Ash on the first card that gets popped to summon, I think is always still just correct. So if they go like Shavara pop 1 and then you just Ash the Trap and Grave, I think that's also very strong. And then again with the Sarama with the Valor Imperm, it's an ignition effect and not something that can just dodge. So being able to preemptively just negate this card so they can't just like chain a Shavara is really strong. So I still think that Valor Imperm on this is really good, especially because they don't get the trap card back. The next one here, Floowandereeze. This is pretty straightforward. You're just going to droll the deck if you can. Valor Imperm on Egglin, and then Ash on the very first bird. If they don't open map and they just summon a bird, then you want to Ash it immediately if it's Robina or Egglin, doesn't matter, because their hand's probably not that good. But otherwise, you're going to go ahead and Ash. If they open up Advent immediately as their first play and banish something, you'll just Ash that because it means their hand's awful. If they open up with Pot immediately, you're just going to Ash that because, you know, drawing 2 is awful to see, especially if they're going to be able to draw into things like map. But at the same time, if they just open up a solo bird, Ash that, Pot, or just Advent right off the rip, usually they'll do that in draw phase to play around droll. But Egglin is definitely the bird that you always want to negate because you want to make sure that your opponent just doesn't have a tribute summon, which is always going to be the most important here. Purrely, I think this deck hasn't really changed whatsoever. You're still going to Mourner, Valor, Imperm on Purrely. This card's very strong. They're on 3 field spell now, so be careful about having target negation against this deck. But at the same time, this is always the best one to shut off. I'm ashing whichever one starts, because if they start off with Lily to add, I'm definitely just going to go ahead and ash the Lily, because that probably means they don't have the My Friend, and I really don't want to get my opponent to My Friend, because even if they put up like a suboptimal like Lily, right, they just go into like a Beauty, they still get to add back, and that's something I just don't want to see happen. So whatever one's first, I'm still just going to ash. Usually it's more correct just to like ash the My Friend, but I think either or is perfectly fine. I'm probably just hitting whichever one I see come down first, to be honest with you. You also have to kind of like gauge how it's going, because like if your opponent has 3 cards in hand that use a quick play to like pitch one, I might just ash that, because at that point, like my opponent is like really needing advantage, and if they have to use one more quick play from hand to get rid of their last card, I feel like I'm in a better position as far as card advantage goes, especially if I'm staring at like an Xyz Encore or something. So you kind of have to gauge that situation. But overall, it's just going to be the first one that comes down. And then Droll. Droll just beats his deck outright. Against Vanquish, Droll is another very good card here too. Ashing Rosin, this is probably just never going to change because of the bounce effect, so you want to make sure that like this doesn't get bounced, right? So at that point, you want to go ahead and Ash immediately. Sometimes you can get away with like a Valor Imperm on Rosin just because they're going to try to add the Borger. But at the same time, I feel like Vanquish Soul players always have the Borger, so like you might as well just Ash. Valor Imperm on Rock is going to be the best value for you, because like if you chain to this one, the new one, and they bounce, then you're kind of just wasting card value. So I'm probably just going to go ahead and negate this one. The Rock also allows them to get into toolbox engines, so like summoning out Dweller, because they can get another 4 on board. So something that you definitely don't want to see happen. So I'm probably always going after Rock, but sometimes you can go after this one. The last one here too is going to be Labrynth. This one also hasn't really changed a whole lot. If your opponent goes pitch Coup Clock and then pitch like Stovey to set Big Welcome, and they use Coup Clock effect to summon, just crow the Coup Clock and they can't do anything. Valor Imperm on Ariana is still just correct. It's the only monster to really hit. You can hold Imperm for Lovely, which is fine because then it trades for the card that was going to get ripped anyway. But at the same point, you're probably just hitting Ariana. Ash on Big Welcome or Welcome, and then Bell on Big Welcome. Overall, I do hope that you do enjoy these videos. The Where to Handtrap guides are really fun to make because it's just a showcase of everything to really know what a tournament. And so a lot of these always change because, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, as I word it here, a super complicated game overall. But it's still very fun, and I want to make sure that everyone knows exactly where the best spots to hand trap are, so you have a better chance at your tournaments that you go to. And as you're learning, you can start really understanding this against the new decks and try to figure out like faster where the correct spots are to hand trap. And that's what's really cool too, because once you have a base knowledge, if you play against something new, you kind of just understand overall like what the deck is probably going for and where the best spot to hit the deck would be. If you haven't already checked out my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or my Metafy page, definitely go ahead and check it all out down in the description below. Again, subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. We're almost to 20,000 subscribers. Enter that giveaway, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you.